Welcome back to the On Life podcast. Today we're speaking about something that not a lot of online schools, Robin, can really say that they have a hand in,
Yeah.
and that is spiritual formation or spiritual growth in their online program. These days, you can pretty much get online classes from any college that you want, but I think what makes Liberty particularly special is that we really have a focus on spiritual growth as well as whatever we're learning. So,
Right.
who do
Yeah.
we have today to kind of dive into this topic with us?
Yeah. So today we have Dr. Mary Lowe with us. She is an online chair in the School of Divinity and also an author with her husband. They co-authored the book called Ecologies of Faith: Spiritual Formation in a Digital Age.
Cool.
Welcome,
Yes,
Mary.
thank you. It's
Thank
good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Just to kick us off, would you just tell us a little bit about you, your background, how you got to Liberty, how you got to writing the book?
Yeah. Well, a little bit of everything. So we've been at Liberty for about 10 years now. We were speaking at a national conference when we met some of the individuals from the School of Divinity. So as we got to talking and talking about our passions of spiritual formation and in particular online education, they indicated that they were from Liberty, and I thought this is a great opportunity. So over the course of the next few months, we just started having conversations about what that would look like to relocate from South Carolina here. And so we made that transition. It's been great. Prior to that time, my husband and I had just finished working on a book that came out of largely my research work for my doctoral program. And I wanted to look at spiritual formation in theological education, particularly online, because of some criticisms that we had encountered that you can't do spiritual formation online. What is this? So I wanted to look at that and to study and to research and say, what is going on? What is spiritual formation? What does that look like? What is the online context? And how can we leverage that then to produce really whole persons who are growing spiritually, but also in other ways of whole person formation. So we've been doing that. I teach here online a number of doctoral courses, as well as I get to teach a residential course at the School of Divinity. And we're looking at leadership formation from a whole person formation approach. So it's not just leadership for the sake of leadership, but it's how do we grow as leaders in that formative process. So a little bit about
Cool.
me and what I do.
So you're all about like training champions for Christ then.
I'm working on it, one person at a time.
Cool. So like, why is it important for us to maybe, consider this topic as we look at maybe a school for going to college for online education?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that it's important is because that's really where we're living our lives. Online is where all of us live. And I think historically we've done a good job at bifurcating. We've separated out or compartmentalized our lives, where we live, and it's generally been online versus offline or residential. And what I've tried to do is to blur those lines in a way of helping students say, I don't just live my life exclusively online. I don't just live my life exclusively offline, but there's a blend of the two. And since that's where we find ourselves, then I think we've got to begin looking at what does it mean to grow and develop spiritually, just as we have to ask, what does it mean to grow intellectually? What does it mean to grow socially? When you look at spiritual formation as whole person formation, I think that broadens the conversation out a lot more to include, I think we were talking earlier about those various components within what we call that ecosystem. So we're part of this broader ecosystem to where we have relationships offline, online. How do we leverage that then to produce an environment that's conducive to growth, development, maturity, and spiritual engagement?
Yeah. So, what would you say are some of the unique challenges of spiritual formation online for an online university student?
Yeah, I think it's always, I just was talking about that recently with an online student and talking about some of the challenges. And I probably would say, I don't know that it's necessarily unique for online students. I think spiritual formation is probably uniquely challenging for all of us. Because I think we don't often understand what it means or what it looks like. How do we evaluate it? So I don't know that it's necessarily unique for online students, but what I often say is that if pressed, maybe there's a challenge of, do we understand the process of formative growth? I often take students to Psalm 1, and we look at what growth looks like from a nature perspective. So there's seasonal growth. A tree isn't growing all the time. There's an environment, there's water that's producing nutrients or nourishment for that tree. And so when we are ourselves in an environment that's conducive to growth, whether that's online or offline, then we begin to see evidences of how that takes place. So when we plant ourselves by nourishing water, we know from the Psalm that the psalmist talks about meditating and being in God's word and delighting ourselves in God's law. When we do that, we see this person of delight, this righteousness, this growth. Online or offline, when we surround ourselves with those environments that are conducive to that growth, we see evidence of maturation, development. So because we're living our lives online so much, it's imperative that we create those environments that are going to encourage growth for our students, so that it's not just sort of that one spiritual piece, it's whole person formation and development. That they aren't just coming online just to complete an assignment or check out a textbook, but they're coming online to form rich, nourishing relationships, significantly meaningful relationships. And that's where we see growth happening, is in the course of those relationships and interactions with one another.
Yeah, I think a challenge that we see a lot in online life is just that feeling from students that are just feeling very isolated and very much like, maybe they're coming back to school after taking a pretty long break, and they're like, I don't know anything about online. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I have no one, like, I'm not in a class setting where I can bump my neighbor and ask for help.
Right.
So, I just feel like the more we go online, the more we take the human element out of a lot of what we do in our lives. I think this is an increasingly important topic.
Right.
Because we don't want our students to feel isolated, but we also, don't want them to miss out on, just so many opportunities that we have here. Like if you're a residential student compared to an online student.
Yeah.
So we're trying to bridge that gap with online life.
Right.
But yeah, I think this is a great topic that.
Well, it's kind of funny you say that. I think it was just last week in my residential class. I asked this student on the front row. I said, can you identify your classmates by name? And he said, I have no idea. We're 3 weeks into the semester, 4 weeks. And I said, well, let's just start with the person next to you that you've been sitting next to for now 3 weeks. And do you know what his name is? I have no idea. So they've been in class together. My husband talks about, he subbed for a professor at the end of the 16-week residential semester. And similar kinds of realities where the students had no clue who was in their class. These are people who have sat next to each other, rubbed elbows together. And we see this often. And one of the things I talk about with my students is this. It seems like there's almost this epidemic of loneliness. In fact, the Surgeon General noted that was a concern that he had about our culture, is this rising loneliness. We see this with older adults. So I don't know that it's unique to online students. In fact, it's probably a misconception about online world that somehow online perpetuates isolation and loneliness, when in fact it's probably just the opposite, that it certainly has the potential for creating these rich, formative engagements. A lot of the research that's in our book points to that, points to the way in which we care for one another online. We can minister to one another in those difficult moments. We can go for advice. We can go for spiritual and emotional encouragement. So there's a lot that can happen. I think maybe one of the pieces that is sometimes missing is that intentionality. We just talked a minute ago about you get out of something what you put into it. So if you're only showing up to get content, if you're only going online to check what your Facebook friends are doing, or to do online banking or order something, then there may be some isolating elements. But if you're going online to really nurture relationships that you formed, either purely online or that blurred mix of both, then you do see some impact on your growth and development. So it's one of the challenges we have is online isn't necessarily isolating. It can, in fact, have just the opposite effect. But what do we do with that? How do we become active participants in our own growth and formation?
How would you encourage someone to kind of step out of that maybe self-inflicted isolation,
Right,
and say, hey, there's a lot available to you out here, but you need to get out there?
Yeah, I think it takes that community of reciprocal engagement. The Apostle Paul spends a lot of time talking about the one another's, right? When we pray for one another, forgive one another, eat with one another. Well, how do you do that online? I think there are some unique and creative ways that you can do it. I look at it, I use the word comparable, that we can't compare online and residential and say it's a one-to-one comparison, because it's not. That person who lives in another state, 3 or 4 states away, isn't going to have some of the same opportunities, but they can have comparable or equivalent opportunities. But it takes both them participating, but the institution, faculty, staff, other students also saying, how can we make this experience bidirectional? I'm reminded of Proverbs 27, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Well, there's that reciprocity, there's that bidirectional engagement. And so I think we have to be intentional about creating opportunities as professors for what that looks like. But students also then need to be, as I said, active participants. You talked about meeting students in different regional areas. They have to get to those places. It's not just going to automatically do something for them if they don't show up. But they show up with their entirety. They bring their families, they bring their experiences, they bring their emotions, all of that to bear in that experience.
Yeah. So, I know as Liberty University, obviously we have a focus, training champions for Christ.
Right.
We want students, to come in at whatever the level they're at and to leave better once they've gone.
Right.
And in your research, you wrote about how this is just part of it. Could you speak a little bit more about that aspect of it? That, and this is one of those I don't know if maybe there's a student who would be like, I'm not, I don't feel like I'm getting all of this from the university, and the fairness of it that, well, they're not going to. So.
Yeah, that's really probably the crux, or one of the crux of our book, is that we talk about social networks. And part of the reason we talk about social networks is that ecosystems approach, that nobody lives purely isolated from those networks, at least nobody that I know. No one is purely isolated from the interactions with other people. Everybody goes to a church. Well, many people go to a church with others. They live in a neighborhood. They're in a family. They go to school. And so you're not just getting your spiritually formative engagement from online, you're getting it from those other sources. And so you're being challenged to grow. When you read a book, you're interacting with the author. When you encounter somebody at church, you're interacting with their social network and their social structure. So the university isn't necessarily the only place where they're getting that formative engagement. They're seeing that in churches, Bible studies, when they serve one another in the city community center. In fact, one of the research pieces that we look at in our book is that the seminary was probably, I think it was the third most influential component in that person's growth and development. Where is it happening? It's happening in the churches. It's happening in the neighborhood. So to think that, well, you're only coming here and you've got to get the spiritual stuff here is a little bit of a misapplication of how we understand that integrative notion of how we live and grow and develop. And so we've got to then help our students say, this isn't the only place you're going to get this, but it's also not just, it doesn't reside here. You've got to take now what you're learning and apply it to that community, apply it to that church, apply it to if you're taking a course on older adults, apply what you're learning to that context with older adults. So it's very integrative. It's again, the reason why we use the ecosystem is that plants don't grow alone. There's an interaction with soil and light and sun and all the things that make a plant grow. Every time Jesus uses a parable, he's drawing our attention back to something in nature, the seeds and the yeast and the plants and all of those things. When we understand how those things grow, we understand how we grow. And so that's why we use that integrative approach to what facilitates growth and formation.
Yeah. And it's, what I appreciate is it's not just in the School of Divinity. I'm in the School of Business.
Exactly.
And in every class, we've had to do a biblical integration.
Yeah.
And I've met students along the way who don't have a Christian background and they struggle with it. But I think it's helpful because then it's one of those, we believe that this is a part of everything that you are.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's probably been a little bit of the disconnect historically with education is, well, I only teach English and I only teach, engineering, or I'm a Bible professor. But in reality, we all have to do a better job of incorporating that into what it is that we're helping our students with, that formation and growth. We aren't just simply asking students to grow intellectually or learn something about business. We want them to do it within a certain worldview. And in Liberty, it's a biblical worldview. So how can somebody who's an engineering student understand what that looks like from a biblical perspective? And that's where the facilitator, the professor, has to do a good job of saying, here's how we make those connections. Here's how we connect the dots, and help them understand it's a bigger world than just online or just engineering or just business or divinity.
Yeah. I mean, like I think, like we mentioned earlier, like I think what you get out of it is what you put in.
Right.
Sometimes you can see, I have a biblical integration to this discussion board, and you can just Google and slap a verse in there, or you can actually like say, how does this apply to what I'm learning right now, and actually get something out of it that way.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you see like a generational difference, like between maybe a student right out of high school who's maybe just going through the whole COVID generation type thing versus someone a little older? Like how do they react to like spiritual growth when they're also going through school?
Right. Yeah, I think probably I have seen some literature and it's also some anecdotal evidence. Recently, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work that Barna does, but they just released a study looking at the fact that younger generation, Gen Zers, millennials, are outpacing older generations in terms of faith commitment, attendance at church, all the things that we typically associate with older adults. And so we're seeing a little bit of a resurgence, which is leading church leaders and faith leaders to say, we need to maybe reimagine what digital discipleship looks like, or relational connections, given the fact that Gen Zers, for example, live a lot of their lives online. There's this sense, and probably which I've seen, that younger generations tend to have a greater ability to blur the lines in a healthy way. There's less of a dichotomy between this and that, online versus real life. Online is real life. That's where we live. And so, for example, incarnational is both virtual and physical for a lot of Gen Zers. And so discipleship looks different for Gen Zers. And what I've seen is that they tend to be a little bit more creative, and they want content that they can control. They're active participants in their formation, where older adults tend to be a little bit more of an absorbing culture. We're just going to absorb content, we're going to take it in, and then go and apply it later. So it's a little bit of a dynamic that we see play out with our online classes here, that older adults bring experiences to the table. They bring their life. They're making decisions. They're making choices. They're in control of their life, and so they want to be in control of that classroom, where younger adults may not have had the breadth of life experiences and don't have that to kind of draw on. In terms of COVID, I think a lot of people were a little bit nervous. In fact, I heard some students say, if this is what online education is, they had to suddenly revert to emergency remote teaching is what I call it. If that's what online education is, then I don't want to do online education. And so there's a little bit of a disservice, I think, during those years of, no, that's not online education. That's not really what it looks like. But helping them understand that part of what it means to be online is the same thing that it means to connect offline. It's the same principles. It's the same practices. How can you do it in a significantly meaningful way?
Yeah. So if a student is listening to this right now and they say, you know what, I want to grow spiritually.
Yeah.
We've spoken about a couple things as far as putting some like intentionality behind it. But what are maybe just some practical tips that you would give for a student who like wants to grow in this area?
Yeah, I think you have to begin to reshape your paradigm of what growing spiritually looks like. Because if it's only the spiritual, you probably do yourself a little bit of a disservice in that you're not growing in other areas as well. At the time of salvation, when we experience redemption, Christ bought back all of us. He buys back our minds, our emotions, our relationships. So we have to bring all of that to bear in that process of growth and sanctification and growing. So what that looks like for students can be, what are you reading? What are you putting into your mind? What are you engaging with? What are you thinking about? What kinds of attention are you giving to your emotions? You say you're a Christian and yet your emotions are wildly out of control. What do your relationships look like? If you are a follower of Jesus and you love Jesus and you know you're to serve others, then what are you doing? And what are you doing with those relationships? Are you cultivating? Are you nurturing? Physically, how are you taking care of that temple of the Holy Spirit? So we use the hand as kind of a model for what that looks like. And the hand is very much this bi-directional engagement where the hand isn't just the digits, the fingers, it has a palm. Our lives isn't just the palm, it has all of those digits too. So there's this bi-directional sort of a synthesis of those dynamics. So I think if a student wants to grow, they've got to put themselves in an environment that's conducive to growth. That tree, if we want that tree to produce fruit, it's got to have some water. It's got to have some sunlight. If you want to grow and produce fruit, you've got to have interactions with students, with other people in your environment. You can't isolate yourself and say, I'm never going to step out of the house and connect with any other soul on the earth. So you've got to be intentional. There's intentionality. There's got to be reciprocity, the one another's. Are you praying for one another? Are you showing hospitality with one another? There's this intentional growth with the whole person. So it's sort of a convoluted way to answer your question. I think spiritual growth is really whole person growth and formation. So when you're addressing all of that, then you can assume that growth is happening. I referenced earlier the parable of the farmer and the seed. The parable says the farmer has no idea how growth happens. He just knows that it happens. But he knows it happens because he knows the soil. He knows seed. He knows how stuff grows. He knows that it needs watering. We have to do that, both ourselves, but also with each other. We have to help facilitate what's already naturally occurring. There's not this magical thing that you do that someday I'm going to be all of a sudden I'm going to be growing and fully grown. A baby goes through stages of growth. We spiritually go through stages of growth. So there's a lot we can do, but we have to be actively engaged in facilitating some of that in our own lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think, students that are here, they're not here by accident. There's a multitude of reasons why students are online. We know that. It could be their military, could be that phase of life that they're in, that this is, it's affordable, like whatever the reason is. But I think we know Holy Spirit is at work guiding people. And one of the things I was reading in your writing was talking about the Holy Spirit's work in a person's life and in this spiritual formation. And I think that when we can recognize that we're not here by accident, like there's a reason for this, there's a purpose for it, you can choose if you're going to be open to it or not. But one other thing, you briefly just mentioned it, but will you talk about the hand and like what each, like there's like 5 different components.
Right. Yeah. So I use the hand. So we all most of us have a hand at the end. So we have our own little model of spiritual formation here. So the thumb represents the physical dimension, the body, the rest, the things that we do for our body and proper nutrition and movement and all the things. The forefinger references the intellectual engagement. We often point to our brains as kind of a way to remind ourselves, we got to remember this thing. What are we putting into our minds? How are we growing? We jokingly use the middle finger as an expression of that emotional dimension. How are your emotions? Are they, again, wildly out of control? Is there some balance? Jesus had a range of emotions. He ranged from certainly not very happy with the money changers to this deep sense of compassion and even grief. The ring finger, in my case, represents an institution of marriage. So it's that social dimension. What do your relationships look like? Are they healthy? Are they toxic? Is there a degree of reciprocity? Is somebody facilitating that growth in you, and are you doing that for somebody else? The pinky finger, kind of that pinky promise that we all make to be best friends forever, that's the moral dimension. What are you doing to shepherd the resources? How are you honoring your mother and father? Are you being faithful and honest and true? And then the palm represents the spiritual dimension. So all of that represents this integrated sort of the bidirectional synthesis of engagement, to where if one of these digits was missing, your hand could function, but we wouldn't say that's ideal. Optimal functioning is holistic. And so we want to see all of these working together in a synergistic way. Similarly, when the Apostle Paul, for example, in 1 Timothy, looking at qualifications of a leader, there's a lot of this that he talks about, right? Someone who's not violent, someone who's gentle, someone who's hospitable, someone who's managing their family well. There's very little said actually about the specific intentional. Paul doesn't say, does that person praying 3 times a day? I think he's making the assumption that we understand that if these things are happening, this is also happening, that we are growing spiritually because we're taking care of our families, because we are doing the things that God has called us to do. And I think you're right. We're not here by accident. I think God calls us to this place for that purpose of both receiving input in terms of growing spiritually, but also the expectation that it's bidirectional, that it goes out. But using this as a model to assess and say, how am I growing spiritually? A lot of my students say, I don't know if I'm growing spiritually. How can I tell? How do I know? And so I ask them these questions. Hey, are you eating? When was the last time you actually slept? When was the last time you evaluated that relationship? Is it toxic? Is it pulling away from what Jesus has asked you to do? Are you spending time with Jesus? Are you spending time in his word? So there's a lot of ways you can use this model to kind of assess growth and formation as that whole person.
That's great.
Did you find anything maybe surprising in your research, like as you kind of dove into this topic, that made you go, oh, I had no idea?
Yeah. Found a lot of surprises. Yeah, certain assumptions that you bring. I think one of the most pleasant surprises was the way in which digital contexts are producing rich formative engagement. I think earlier on we had that conversation of the either or, and the question sometimes, so which best, this or this? And I had to say yes, they are both best. And one of the reasons I say that is just some experiences that I've had that came out of my research. One of which was, we went to a conference and we met a young man at the conference who was sharing his story, and he had autism. And he said, physical gatherings are challenging for me, for my autism. I can't relate to people. I can't engage. This makes me really nervous. He said, but for the first time in my life, as a member and a leader of my digital church, I get to serve. I get to minister. I get to be a leader in my church. I don't have the pressure of having to navigate what I can't navigate because of that condition. And I thought, what a neat opportunity to say, it's not a secondary, inferior area of importance. It's just as important as you going to your physically gathered church. Opportunities for him to serve. Another, probably closer to home, is my mom. She's 92 years old. She lives in Florida, and she's somewhat physically limited in what she can do and where she can go. She and my dad were missionaries in Haiti for nearly 30 years. And so she knows ministry. And so the decision to stay home and not get to go to church was difficult. But when she discovered she could go online and attend church, all of a sudden she says, I'm attending 3 and 4 services every Sunday. So she's not able to get out and experience, but where she lives, they drop in all the time and they bring her stuff. She sees her friends and she takes her golf cart to the mailroom and sees people. But she's able to attend her home church and the church locally where she was. She even gets to go to TRBC every Sunday all the way from Florida. So I think broadening our understanding of what online looks like, that it's not an either or. It's very much a both and. So what's in the best interest of the student was kind of one of my takeaways from my research. We can no longer say, you have to come to this place-based to go to church or to go to a campus, as great as that is, and there's value in that. But maybe you staying in that place and doing your ministry that you've been engaged in building for the last 10 years, maybe that's actually more productive for you. And then you get to share with us online what it is that you're learning in real time. And then you get to take this classroom and you get to take it back to that ministry, back to that community. So I think those are the pleasant surprises that came out of my research. Yeah.
Well, one question we ask all of our guests.
Yep.
We have a very wide range of answers to this question, but I'd love to hear your take on it. What words of encouragement do you have for our online students who are tuning in today?
Yeah, I think little bias note here. I love our online students. That's the world I have been in for years. And so what I have seen is that our online students bring this rich depth of experience, life experience. They've lived lives, and they bring that to the online classroom in a way that really informs and shapes my own learning and development. And because of that, I think it expands the lives of the other students as well. So I'm encouraged. A lot of people talk about all the technology and the changes, but I see that as a silver lining. I see that as the next iteration of what that looks like is going to be really great, because students are beginning to see, or they have seen for a long time, that my life over here is actually informing my life online. And our online students do it wonderfully. And the fact that they're all around the world, you talked about military, I know I have a lot of international students. And it's so exciting that they get to bring pictures and show them in our virtual drop-ins, or we sometimes will have a Christmas party and they bring food to their party and we eat while we're online and talk about the thing that we have in our office or in our home. So it's something I look forward to developing and exploring more fully, is the way that our online students are really shaping how we do education. In fact, sometimes I talk to our residential faculty and I say, our online faculty are really doing some neat things. We need to maybe look at what they're doing and bring those practices into the residential classroom. I think historically it's probably been the other way around. Online faculty say, well, what is the residential professor doing and how can I adapt that? But we're seeing this shift now. We're seeing this shift in some of those best practices moving to the physically gathered. The shift from maybe an institution-centric approach to education to a student-centric. The student maybe has a full-time job and they're caring for a family and they're not ready to go online until midnight. Right. That's not going to happen here. I don't think I know any faculty who are going to have a class at midnight. And so the opportunities are great. And it's a world in which I'm looking forward to stepping into and bringing others into that as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
You.
This is a great conversation. I definitely learned a lot. I don't know about you,
Absolutely.
Robin. But we look forward. Maybe we'll have you back on the show to talk more about it.
I would love it. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, this has been another episode of the On Life Podcast.
Living in abundance wherever God puts you.